Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Triangle Offense. I'm Monish. As always, I'm joined by Nishant, and we are 1 week into the NBA now. So, we'll pick our team of the week in today's episode. Also, sad news coming out from the Brooklyn Nets that Spencer Dinwiddie has hurt his ACL and will probably miss the remainder of the season. Not confirmed yet, but nobody comes out from an ACL that quick. So, we'll talk all about that as well. Hey Nishant, what's up? Let's talk about Spencer Dinwiddie first. He seems to be injured. How does that hurt the Brooklyn Nets? Because yesterday they rested Kyrie and KD, and Dinwiddie was out, of
Yeah.
course, because of his injury. And then they ended up in a loss, the second consecutive loss to Memphis Grizzlies now. Does this kind of hamper Brooklyn's plans? Because Dinwiddie was part of the starting five.
Right.
How much will it hurt him being hurt?
I mean, it's a luxury to have Dinwiddie around, but I'm not
Uh-huh.
gonna I'm not gonna say this is something essential that they will now miss,
Uh-huh.
because I think with the arrival of Kyrie and KD both being in the lineup, Dinwiddie was probably
Uh-huh.
the one that would have suffered the most in terms of what he lost compared to the others. Right,
Uh-huh.
he loses his starting spot, or at least several
Uh-huh.
minutes and a lot of touches. The offense would otherwise flow through Dinwiddie. So
Uh-huh.
we were only just beginning to see what this team looks like with Dinwiddie coming off the bench or in the starting lineup, but off the ball a lot. Didn't really get a full sense of it before he got injured. So it's more of speculation and hypotheticals at this point as to what the Brooklyn Nets lose out on. But I will say this: if the perspective is of chip contenders, and if we're
Uh-huh.
looking at it from a standpoint of how does this affect their chances of winning the championship, I'd say not by much, because championships at the
Okay.
end of the day are won by your superstars, your best two players or three if you have them. Dinwiddie
Uh-huh.
is not quite at that level to make this the big three in Brooklyn. He's a great player. He's an all-star on his day,
Uh-huh.
but he's not like a James Harden guy where you look at this three and go, "There's your big three." It's not like Steph, Clay, and KD. So this team winning the championship or not depends entirely on Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Just like Lakers winning the championship or not depended entirely on Anthony Davis and LeBron James. Yes, they had a
Uh-huh.
squad. Yes, they had a bunch of role players who did a great job. But ultimately, as long as the big two are there, they're contenders, right? And that's the same with the Brooklyn Nets. Unfortunately, with Dinwiddie, we didn't get in a run of games where we saw really what kind of impact he would have, where we knew exactly what his role was going to be, where he figures in the rotation, how many minutes, what's his usage rate. We saw none of that. We were just barely scratching the surface before he got injured.
Uh-huh.
That also means it's easier for the Brooklyn Nets to adjust because, like I said, it's still extended preseason. They have all the time in the world to make adjustments, maybe pick up a free agent, see where it goes, right? So I don't think this affects their contender status much. Is it a blow to lose him? Absolutely. For the league, yes. For the team, yes. It's a luxury to have a scorer like that be your third or
Uh-huh.
even fourth option, depending on where you
Uh-huh.
rank Karis LeVert. So they've lost some luxury buffer, but they're still that team.
Uh, Interesting that you mentioned the trade piece because that's where I was going next. Now, Dinwiddie was seen as one of their trade assets that if you wanted to bring in James Harden, Bradley Beal, whoever, like a third superstar, if you wanted in the team, Dinwiddie was going to be part of the package, right? Dinwiddie, probably Jarrett Allen, probably Karis LeVert, and all three of them together, probably if it was James Harden.
Yeah.
Now, that kind of is ruled out because of his injury. Does that mean that Brooklyn's chances of landing James Harden is now over? Because why would Rockets go for Dinwiddie now, right?
I think it affects their chances for sure because look, the Rockets. First of all, I don't think they really wanted any of these offseason moves that they're being forced to make. First, it was
Uh-huh.
Westbrook. Now it's Harden. And the problem with all of this is they've given up Westbrook, right? And who do they bring in? They got John Wall in return.
Uh-huh.
Great player,
Uh-huh.
but very similar to Westbrook and exceptionally injury prone. I mean, he's not played in a year or two, right? Then they've got in DeMarcus Cousins. Again, he's barely played in the last 2 years. Do
Uh-huh.
they really want to add an already injured Dinwiddie? And that's an ACL. Even if it's partially torn, even if they're projecting that he might come back at some point this season, that's not an injury you want to bet on because there's
Yeah.
really no telling in what shape or form he comes back from an injury like this. He's younger. Chances are he'll come back pretty good, but you don't
Uh-huh.
know. And when you already have two heavily injury prone guys, and you already have Eric Gordon, who's hardly ever in the rotation because he's always injured, do you really want to add this piece? This lowers Dinwiddie. Sad as it is, this lowers Dinwiddie's trade value. At least if you're talking about the Houston Rockets. So I
Uh-huh.
think I think Harden to the Nets is pretty much off the table. And even before it was off the table, but now it's just
Mm-hmm.
about done because the Nets
Mm-hmm.
don't really have anything to give, unless Houston want to lower their standards to an extent where they're saying, "All right, just give us whatever you have and we'll trade James Harden." Unless that day comes, I just don't see a possibility of James Harden landing up on the Nets, especially seeing that there are still other teams that can make better offers.
They lost Dinwiddie. How do they fix this? Who do they get to the starting lineup? Is it going to be Karis Levert? Is it going to be Torian Prince for some more size into
Yeah.
that? How do they change the style of play at all?
Again, their biggest advantage is how early this unfortunate incident occurred, how early into the
Mm-hmm.
season, because they have all the time in the world to make adjustments. And they've only just begun figuring out their offense, right? They've barely had 2 or 3
Mm-hmm.
games. Um, so they have all the time in the world. It's a good sign for them that Karis LeVert seems to be rising to the occasion. And we saw flashes of this in the bubble last season. And we're seeing some
Right.
more of that now. So it's good for them that Karis LeVert has picked up some of that opportunity. Torian Prince, these guys are going to be largely rotation pieces. I don't think you can look at any of Torian Prince or Jared Allen or even DeAndre Jordan for that matter and look at them as
Mm-hmm.
your legit third scoring option. They can add a few points, but I'd much rather look at Karis LeVert that way than anyone else in that team. And then they have a perennial perimeter threat in Joe Harris. So
Mm-hmm.
that's another piece that they have that they can always bring in and supplement some of that scoring. And then you have Torian Prince and DeAndre Jordan and Jarrett Allen and everyone else who can contribute both rebounds, defensive presence, and some points. So this team is stacked, which is why I keep saying Dinwiddie was a luxury option for them, and they've
Mm-hmm.
lost some of that luxury buffer, but they still retain their superstar core and they have plenty of scoring options all around them. Their challenge still remains: can they rise up to playoff level defense? Can they get stops when they need? Do they have the kind of adjustments, rotations, and schemes that they'll need um, to take on some of the best in the East? Because the East is quite diverse in that sense. You've got
Mm-hmm.
Boston that plays one way, you've got Philadelphia that poses a whole different challenge altogether. So that's really what they'll need to figure out over the length of the season is because I'm confident they can get their offense going, but can they get their defense to a level that they need it to be in the playoffs?